Hello, everyone, and welcome to Novella, or Short Story. I'm Don Sakers. I'm your moderator. I'm a science fiction fantasy writer. I review books for Analog, and I am a retired librarian. The panels, like all our panels, is being recorded, and in the fullness of time, they will all appear on YouTube and probably lots of other venues. So be aware of that. If you audience, thank you for coming. If you have questions, please notice the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. And we have two venues that you can give us input. One is called chat and one is Q&A. The chat tends to be very busy and scrolls quickly off of our screen, whereas the Q&A part is much more visible to us. So if you have actual questions, please put them in Q&A so they don't get lost. I think we will go about 2/3 of the way through the panel and then formally start answering questions, but please feel free to post them whenever you want. We'll keep an eye on them and try to answer things as we go along as well. And at this moment, I am going to turn things over to our panelists to let them introduce themselves. And let's start with Karen.
Oh, me. Oh, gosh. Hi, my name is Karen Osborne. I am a writer of many short stories in Uncanny and Beneath Ceaseless Skies and places like that. I have a Nebula nomination this year, which is pretty awesome. I'm also the author of Architects of Memory, which is out on August 25th from Tor Books. It's an extremely exciting novel, space opera, and you should all buy it. Of course. So I'm on this panel because I've written a whole bunch of stuff, a lot of short stories, some novellas, and a bunch of novels, and they're all different, and I can't wait to talk about how.
Margaret.
I'm Margaret Riley. I'm the owner and editor-in-chief for Changeling Press. We're a small press. We've been out since 2004 when we opened our doors. We've published more than 3,000 short stories, novellas, and anthologies. And I'm happy to be here. My pronouns are she, her, and they, you.
Monica, how about you?
Hi everyone, I'm Monica Louzon. I'm a writer, editor, and poet, and I have edited a collection of short stories. And I have a short story, San Cibernetico, in this anthology, The Internet is Where the Robots Live Now. I also have a novel that I'm in edits on and a novella that I'm currently working on as well.
And bringing up Sarah.
Hi there, my name is Sarah Pinsker. My pronouns are she, her, and I have about 50-something short pieces published at this point, ranging from short story to novella, and one novel, This is a Song for a New Day, and a collection from Small Beer that I can point to right there. It's called Sooner or Later Everything Falls into the Sea.
And can I ask the authors to go ahead, when you have a moment, and go ahead and type your titles into the chat so that our audience can catch them. I know that sometimes things go by really quickly and the audience would like to know about them. Okay, folks, so we're here to discuss novels, novellas, and short stories. And I think the very first thing we should do is try to get a working definition of what we mean by those different terms. So who wants to jump in to be first?
I can speak to the SIFWA definitions, which I believe are it's just word count alone. So we can talk later about the more spiritual aspects, but a short story is usually considered to be up to about 7,499 words. Then there's actually novelette, which is about 7,500 to I'm gonna forget now, 17,499 maybe, and then novella is 17,500 to 39,999, I think, and then 40,000 and up is novels, and then some of the other awards have slightly different categories, but that's how SIFWA defines it.
Ours are based on price points, which is based on page count, but the rough word word count translation we use is under 50,000 words is a novella and over is a novel. And we used to have a shorter word count, but I think the expectation with the reader market has changed a bit through the years.
Anyone else?
And it depends on the genre that you're in too. For example, Architects is 100,000 words, but that's way too long for example, for a romance, by at least 20,000 words.
Now, those are the word or page counts. Are there any other differences between the different forms? Sarah, you said philosophical, but let's talk about that aspect.
The wonderful short fiction writer Christopher Rowe, who has a collection that I'm blanking on the name of, but it's also from Small Beer. We've gotten in debates before where he says that he thinks the novelette doesn't exist. His theory is that that a novelette is a long short story or a short novella, and that short stories have a reason to live and novellas have a reason to live, and novels do, but the novelette is purely word count. And I think his theory is interesting. I actually think that there's a reason for novelettes as well. But I think a novella is great when you have a big idea that fits well around one person. It doesn't have a lot of subplots. Maybe it's something you can follow through one straight thought. And a short story is one moment, and a novel gets to be all the things.
I certainly think trying to stick a lot of subplots in a novella or a short story is a writer's worst nightmare, because you'll never do justice to any of the characterizations for too much in too small a space.
I wrote a novelette this year that could have been a short story, but I just wanted to spend more time on some of the character interactions, and so that made the word count balloon a little bit, and I'm not sorry.
Yeah.
So if you, yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The novella that I'm working on, I originally brought it as a short story to my writing critique group, and they were reading it, and it was like I only brought like maybe the first like third of it, and they were like, "So this is a novella, right?" And I was like, "That hadn't been my plan." But then as we were talking about it and going through the critique, I realized that the ideas in there around this one character, it was going to be too much for me to try to cut down without losing valuable, like there's just essential stuff for the story that needs to be in there, and it's never going to fit into the really short format.
That's an important point too, because normally when you start out, I know as a writer myself, I don't have a feel for the end length. It's more like where the book ends up determines what market it's headed to. Do you find that you do that as well, or did you actually think, I'm going to write a short story, and then it sort of escaped you?
I usually start with an idea, and I usually know how long that idea could sustain a story. And that's taken some time. I mean, 50 stories later, I can, when I get an idea, I have a feel of whether it's a piece of flash or whether it's a novella. I think it comes with some practice and a lot of trial and error. But I think ideas do have natural lengths. Sometimes you combine ideas and that can become a novel, but the idea itself usually comes with an ideal length in my head.
I'm still figuring that out, Sarah. I know, like, when I start something, I went to a workshop called Clarion, and one of the things that my workshop mates would tell me is that, you know, Karen, this could be a novel, and I'd be like, yes, but does it work as a short story? So I'm slowly trying to figure out that difference, and and it's harder because you want to go, oh, I have all these ideas, so you have to pare it down. And from what I was, the thing I can think most of is that a short story, are you preparing the entire opera turandot, for example, or are you just going to sing Nessun Dorma? Because one or the other, you're going to prepare it entirely differently, and you're going to have different sorts of ways of thinking about like the piece as just Nessun Dorma, or the or seeing it within the entire opera with context.
I like that opera comparison.
We had a question that was kind of germane to this. So suppose you're in that position, you have a number of short stories that you've written that everybody tells you should be novels or novellas. How do you decide which one?
The one you're nerding out about. The one you're nerding out about, just the one that you are at that moment going, oh, that's the coolest thing I could do right now. I can't wait to spend so much time with it, because you will.
Yeah, it's really is like, how much time do you want to spend with this story, and how much of that will be fun, and how much of it will be you forcing yourself to spend time with it. Because it's going to be a lot easier to take a short story or an idea that would be a lot of fun to explore over 100, 200, 300 pages than trying to just take something that really is just like a ladle dipping into the soup. Like, you don't want to drink the whole soup sometimes.
When people tell you that this short story should have been a novella or a novel too, one thing you might want to get back to them and ask is that because it doesn't work as a short story? Did I leave too much out? Because a short story is the art of writing less. And, you know, I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter, I didn't have time to write a short one there.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like, it's sometimes harder to write a short story and distill things down. But I think Margaret, you're right that I think the other question that is sometimes happening there is that someone may be saying that they want more of those characters or more of that world. It doesn't necessarily mean what you did was incomplete. Sometimes it just means that that they want more, and you get to decide whether you give it to them or not. There are things that exist as perfect gems of a short story that I hope are never expanded, and there are things that I'm delighted to find expanded. For me, an example is Dream Snake, which started as the novelette, I believe, of Mist and Grass and Sand by Vonda McIntyre. And I had a teacher who gave us short stories as a kid, and then later I found out they weren't, some of them actually had novels connected, and I didn't know until I was reading Dream Snake, and I had this moment where the two things connected, and the story that I had loved was suddenly part of a novel, and it's one of my favorite novels. But that moment where I realized, oh, this is more, was delightful.
My moment with one of those is a short story that became a novel called The Traitor Baru Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. And if you read the short story, you know exactly what happens at the end. And it changes your entire experience of reading the novel. Because if you know what happens at the end, it's just a completely different novel. And it could have been it could have stayed as a short story, but the novel's also good. And I just love that idea of having something so small, the short story being so important for in the grand scheme of things.
And those things tend to illustrate well the fact that a story is a moment.
Mhm.
like because the difference between those are like, this is the most important moment, which is why probably Seth Dickinson chose to, you know, build up to that, even though people already know that ending, because
Mhm.
it's got this natural rise to it that if that was stuck at the beginning of something, it would kind of destroy the rhythms.
So, as writers, which form do you prefer, or is there one? Anyone?
It depends on the story idea, because like I like doing short stories for the chance to explore that idea and the chance to get into that world, and then move, like I guess like I'm trying to think, for the novels I've done, they've just started out as like, I know this is going to be a novel. Like I know that this will need a lot of work and a lot of coaxing, but it will be a novel. Um, so the short stories are, for me, they're kind of fun because I get to play around and figure out what worlds I like the best, and whether or not, and think about whether I want to take them further down the road. But the novels are also really fun because then you have time, like you just have the time to explore the world and the economics and like all the people interactions and the culture a little bit more than, and think that stuff through more fully than you do have to for a short story.
I find, I mean, I'm excited about whatever. I think that if I get an idea, I'm excited about that idea, and I'm happy to work with it on whatever it is. But novels, like, there tends to be an order to things. Like, you have to think a little bit strategically about when this is versus that. Whereas short fiction, you have a little more control over. Um, and a novel's a huge commitment. Like, I love just diving into a story and knowing that I can get from the beginning to the end in one sitting. And like this whole novel that I just turned in, all I wanted to do was write, I mean, I loved it, and I also was dying to write some short fiction again, and that's what I've promised myself as a reward. It's not writing. My reward is writing short again for a little while before I do the next novel. And the comparison that I like to use is, writing a novel to me feels like getting onto a generation ship. Like there's this like endless middle, and that part I find very difficult. Like, it's not that I fall out of love with the idea, but you have to be in love with the idea of the place you're getting to, because it's a long haul journey. So you have to kind of inhabit that middle without the end in sight, but sort of have it in the back of your mind, and still exist in that moment, not rushing towards it. And I find that to be a delicate balance. So all told, I kind of love writing short fiction more, but don't tell the novels, because I love having written the novels, but I love writing the short fiction.
I kind of see it, and so I've been basically married for 20 years at this point. So I kind of see it as like dating. Like, you can have fun with short stories. You can play around in worlds. You can have some fun. You can see what other places look like and how they function, and you can put out some really nice things. But yeah, novels are a commitment. You have to make sure that you want to be with that novel for a while. And once you're in it, it's kind of like, I mean, you can get a divorce with your novel, but then you've put in all of that time. And I mean, I firmly believe that if the novel and you just aren't working out, you have to kind of go away from it, because otherwise you're just putting more time into something that isn't going to work. But you don't have to do that with a short story. Like I wrote one earlier this month that I kind of spent like maybe about 5 hours on, and I got to maybe 4 or 5 pages, and I'm like, you know what? This isn't gonna work. Bye. And that feeling is so freeing. And you don't really have that, you know, and novels are a lot more complicated. So you have to make sure that you're gonna, you know, hang out with it for a while. But short stories can be a lot more fun.
Margaret?
Can I add one other thing?
Sure.
Which is also another lovely thing about short stories is, short fiction in general, there, from a business perspective, for the markets you're selling to, there's less risk involved in buying a story than in buying a novel. And therefore, and they're usually the risk is spread out over several stories that are in that issue. And so there, both from that financial perspective and from a literary perspective, there's more room for experimentation. You can try the really weird perspective, like writing something, entirely in second person, or writing from the point of view of a skateboard, or whatever the weird ideas can sustain for shorter bursts than the big idea. So you get to try all these different things and have a chance of selling them, but also sustain them at the right length. Whereas if you did any of the weirder things for a whole novel, it can sometimes work. And there are people who've done some great, really, really experimental novels, but it's harder to find a market, and it's harder to find a publisher and all of that for longer fiction like that.
And also with like perspectives, narrators that have a more complicated sort of way of speaking, or maybe you're doing second person, or maybe something else that just can't really function over a long period of time. And I should say I love my husband very much, and he's my best friend.
I was wondering about the
sequel. No, I was like, oh my God,
analogy.
what are they going to think? No, he's the best.
Margaret, anything to add?
But one of the things, we publish exclusively short fiction, but one of the things we have done through the years is we've moved more and more to longer and longer series, because a lot of our work is, everything we do is romance, but we do a lot of sci-fi, futuristic, dark and urban fantasy, paranormal. And a lot of that lends very well to serial, as opposed to series where each book is a different set of characters. If you have an idea that you're not sure of the general marketability of, with speculative fiction, you do 1, 2, 3 shorts, and if it's still selling, you keep writing. And that's a nice compromise on the financial aspect of it. We don't have the money sunk in. That's the way you can make speculative fiction actually marketable. You don't have to invest half your resources in one book that goes down. It's very expensive to publish a novel versus a short story or a novella. But 20 short stories, yes, eventually you've got more in them. But on the other hand, if they're selling well, you're feeding the addiction.
Okay. Let's move a little bit toward technique questions. As a writer, what are the differences between the different forms? Or is there any difference?
Very definitely. You have got to be very focused with a short story. You've got to, one of the tricks for short stories is that you don't start in the beginning. You start where the action starts. If you've got to have backstory, it can be in the dialogue, so the reader learns it the way the two characters or the party interacting learn it. You don't put huge chunks of backstory in. I know as a beginning author, I used to write 2 or 3 chapters worth of, I wrote a book that had a whole chapter about remodeling a house at the beginning of the reader doesn't need to read that.
But sometimes you do. Sometimes you need that chapter written for yourself. So I think go on and write that chapter if you feel it coming out of your fingers.
Just don't include it in the finished book.
Right. Don't include it in the finished book.
Yeah. I think novels are more forgiving in that way. Like there is some room for digression and extraneous stuff and lengthy character build. Like there's room for all kinds of things. Whereas in shorter fiction, as Margaret just said, you have, and said well earlier, that you have to sort of whittle it down to what's necessary. So it's a stricter form in terms of where it should start, in terms of what should be in it. Even though it's got more room, I'm not contradicting myself when I said you can be more experimental, but in terms of getting to the heart of things and honing down what it is you want to say and getting the language across, I think that everything is a lot more precise in a short piece.
One of the things that I did when I started writing short fiction, and the stories were terrible and they will never see the light of day, but I kept getting form rejections. I was like, okay, I need to figure out what I'm doing wrong. So I ended up going to the library and I got out every single freaking anthology they had. And I just started reading through for stories that caught my attention. And then I'd read the story and I'd be thinking as I was reading it, what are they doing well? Where are they starting the story? How much information are we really getting about the character? What's being shown through the dialogue? And just what are the authors, their particular styles, and also like the time periods, because I was getting stuff from like the 50s on, just what are hallmarks of good short story writing in that time, in those time frames, in that collection, what really stands out. And doing that really helps me advance my ability to write concisely and effectively.
No, that's a fabulous thing to do, Monica. Like that's something I have done. Also reading stories and figuring out what you would do differently. Even if they're like, Hugo or Nebula winning stories, sometimes you look at them and you go, okay, so what are they doing? But how would I do it differently based on, what I know about myself? What I like to do when I'm writing novels is to see every chapter as a short story, to make sure it functions, within the larger gestalt of the book, but to have it itself function with a beginning and a middle and an end. And that has made me a better short story writer, even when in 2019 I didn't get to write one short because I was working on a novel on deadline.
One thing I found helpful too for the novel chapters and assessing whether or not I've achieved that like standalone nature is bringing it to the writing critique groups, and being like, hey, this is part of a bigger story, but does this chapter stand alone on its own well? Like, does this, not that it could be published as a short story, but does it feel like a complete segment of a story here? Like, does it feel like it had that beginning and maybe the dip or the rise and then a nice like satisfactory ending to transition on to the next chapter from?
Oh, critique groups are great. I love them.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool exercises you can do with short stories. Like I bristle sometimes when people say that short stories are practice for novels, because I don't believe that, and I think they're a separate thing. But you do get to practice different techniques in a space where you can see the result of your work. Like writing an entire novel and putting it away is an exercise in restraint, but not everyone has time to do that. But you can experiment with voice and language and style and all and genre in short fiction in ways that I feel like I love to jump from genre to genre. So it's great to be able to do that in short fiction. Going back to technique, another couple of things you can do that are worth doing, both with your own fiction and with published stuff, is reading the first 3 paragraphs of a shorter piece, or the first 3 pages of something longer, and asking, what does this promise? And then looking at and then following that through to the end. If it's your own work, say, did I fulfill that promise? If it's someone else's, say, did they fulfill that promise? And just looking at it from that perspective.
I love that idea about promise. I feel like that was when when my Clarion group helped me realize that was one of the moments when I felt like, and God knows if it actually happened, but I felt like, oh, I get it. Okay, I get what this is. I get where this is going, because fulfilling that promise to your reader is so important.
For the short stories, having the stakes clear pretty quickly in the story, generally, if you've got those stakes clear within the first like half page or so, that makes the rest of your story that much stronger. Like, and inevitably in my critique groups, when we're reading a story, if we have a story and it's like, this is a great story, but something's not working, and then we start looking for, okay, where are the stakes? And you find out the things that are at stake for the character are halfway through the story or the end of the story, and then the person goes back and rewrites it so that the stakes are in the beginning. Inevitably, the story is much stronger.
Oh, and I love it when you have the stakes at the beginning and then it's solved, but in the process, like you introduce a whole new big thing, and it's like, oh, I love that. I just love when writers are able to do that in a novel, and you can do that in a short story too. But most likely, you need that space to really push it further.
That one, there's a comparison that I've used recently that I've liked, which is braiding a challah, like. So you start off, like if you're making a braided bread, you start off at the beginning with a certain number of strands, and you can do all kinds of things in the middle. You can add in sub braids, and you can put one on top and one's on the side, and you can do as many strands as you want. But then generally speaking, I think at the other end, it's going to look the most symmetric and beautiful if you bring it back to the earlier threads. So those other ones have been tied up ahead of time, and then you come back around to the earlier ones.
That's a great analogy.
One really good technique I've seen series and serial writers use is to have characters in the first few books that are only mentioned or who perform a significant secondary role, but almost cameos, who later get their own books. And that works really well when you've got a sci-fi fantasy or something where you've got a party involved or a crew, whatever your unit is, it's multiple people. So we know they all exist, but we concentrate on one or two major relationships per novella.
I thought Joe Abercrombie's Half a King series, he basically did that with the 3 books in that trilogy. He focuses on one character and relationships, and then a tangential character gets their own story, and then yet another character in the third one. And I really found that engaging.
By the time you get to them, you usually are ready to hear more about this character because, well, maybe he was just a ship's communications officer. By now, he's done this in book 1, in book 2, and in book 3, he actually did this. And now I want to know more about it.
Writing serials. Oh, that's the one thing I can't do yet. Like, I don't feel like I'm good enough yet because I work in a way that you have to go back and that I go back and tinker with things and move things around, where if you publish in a serial, you're committing to that, and you can't go back, and you have to keep on going. Ooh, that's
People I know who have done that, who do that with us, and we've got some 20 and 30 book series out there, have extraordinary spreadsheets.
Yeah.
You have to practically, if you don't have a character record sheet for all of you old D&Ders out there, or a spreadsheet for every character, you had better have one heck of a good beta reader who kept them for you, because I've tried to go back to series and serials I worked on 20 years ago and can't find the spreadsheet for, and oh my,
I think George R.
I don't remember who had green eyes.
I think George R. Martin has said that there are a few readers that he turns to now, and there's a Song of Ice and Fire wiki that he goes to because it's more accurate than the records he kept. I can't remember where I read that, but I think if you're lucky enough to have really careful reading fans, then that can they can help you with some of that.
That's like hashtag goals, right? You know, have fans that do all your record keeping for you.
Facebook reader groups now. One of our authors has a reader group that the readers formed another group to keep track of stuff like that. Really, really helpful. And of course, now she's recruited them as beta readers going, okay, guys, did I screw this up? But she's also got like the most involved, that one happens to be an MC. And so there's 3 or 4 motorcycle clubs and characters who did this for this and this. And oh my God, I'd go blind. I'm not her editor.
We have we've had a question about minor characters and how you deal with them in shorter and longer forms.
What's the question?
About minor characters.
Oh, how you deal with them? Sorry, that was the question. Right. So if the question is, I think in shorter fiction, and this is not a rule, this is just one school of thought, like in short stories, you maybe don't have a ton of room to introduce a lot of characters well. And you're generally focusing on one moment, and so you may hone it down to the people who matter most to that story, and it might be mostly major characters. And then as you have more room, you can introduce more minor characters. I generally think that every character, I approach everything by saying every character is the major character in their own life, and trying to make sure that everyone in my stories could potentially carry their own story, even if it's a more boring one, even if it's not the one I want to tell, that they all have the things that they believe and stand for, and that if they happen to speak, that would be apparent, and that in the absence of their speech, it's whatever they're doing is consistent with who they are.
Speaking from a business perspective, now that you know, authors use things like Patreon as a major form of connecting with the audience and helping them, you know, survive and live another day. That can be fun. Like, there's at least one character that I've written about who's a minor character that I will write stories about someday, and that's a place to put them. I know writers that write these stories about their minor characters, and then they appear in other magazines. And I think it could be fun to do that a lot.
One thing I have found for, especially with my novel, trying to figure out perspectives and points of view, when the minor character ends up being the one you're writing more about and is more interesting to you, they probably should be the primary character, and maybe flip-flop those roles.
I was just about to say too, going off of what you said, Monica, wow, that went right out of my head. I'm going to cede the floor because I don't remember what I was going to say. In about 10 minutes, I'll be like, remember that thing?
I've never done that. We also have a couple of questions asking about sort of marketing realities. What's better? What's easier to market, short or long?
Marketing is a very specific term. So if the question is if you're self-publishing, there's a different question of which is easier to market that I'm not in a good position to answer. If the question is which is easier to sell, not which is easier to market, there's still a lot of short fiction venues, and you are and they are mostly open to, they love finding new people. So in terms of getting a foothold, it's often easier to start in short fiction. But if you don't love short fiction, I wouldn't bother. I would work on honing a novel if what you really want is just to get to a novel and you're using a springboard. the market for getting to the position of having a novel and finding an agent and all of that in traditional publishing is a longer and harder road than short fiction, where you don't need an agent and you just have to read contracts carefully.
Anyone else?
Yeah, well, by the time your novel is with a publisher, there's a whole team of people behind it who are working to support it. And this is just traditional publishing because it's what I know. And while you are, and it's kind of different for short fiction, and the two have different audiences anyway. So it's a little, so it's kind of like apples and oranges, because, you know, your short fiction consumer might be, you know, in line at the bank or standing in their social distancing pickup line for their kids at the school that nobody's at. Sorry, it's weird. Life is weird these days. Whereas a novel, someone sits down with a novel or listens to the novel in the car. So it's really apples and oranges regarding marketing, and who's behind it, and social media is important, but that's a whole nother panel.
If you, by marketing, you mean presenting the work to someone to be published, it's probably easier as an early author, first-time author, if you're just getting started, to market shorter fiction, because the publisher has less upfront costs in taking a gamble on you. And it's also going to be a lot easier usually to market to small press than it is to market to traditional press. Of course, also traditional press is shrinking so rapidly that you know, the first thing I would say in marketing is not to concentrate on the length, but in who's publishing, what feels comfortable in your reading area. If what you read is all basically, you know, multiple 100K novels all in a long series, then you're going to need to find a house that's what they publish, as opposed to somebody who's doing shorter fiction.
And I think just kind of reading into the questions, and I'm sorry if I'm going too far on this, but I kind of got the sense that part of it was how can you make more money as a writer? And I think we can all pause and laugh hilariously at that question. Yeah, you can't make a whole lot of money as a writer. And if that's what you're into it for, get a better job. We have a comment question here. Is there a clear-cut difference between a novel composed of chapters that feel like complete things and episodic forms? Or at this point, do we just go ahead and call it a novel if it's novel length?
If the chapters feel like complete short stories, it's probably an anthology of short stories. I kept looking at that question, trying to come up with a logical answer to it, but chapters to me almost always end in some sort of a cliffhanger that makes me want to read the next chapter.
It might be a question about fix-up novels, which are novels that are built out of short stories, either previously published or not, that often do progress a larger plot, but they also stand on their own. There's some great examples in throughout science fiction, a long history of this. City by Clifford Seamack, and I think I, Robot, and there's tons of them. And in literary fiction, like Olive Kittredge and A Visit from the Goon Squad, there's a ton of them. And Lavi Tidhar has written a couple, Central Station. So it is possible to do that, and at which point you are saying kind of this is a novel made of short stories and it's novel length, so we'll call it a novel. But usually it does progress a central plot, or else it's a collection.
Serialized short fiction novel.
One of my favorite examples of sort of what you were saying, Sarah, is Marina Lostetter's Numenon. and I haven't the other two in the series are on my TBR list, so I haven't read them yet. But the first one takes place over hundreds and hundreds of years with different characters on the same ship, but they're all telling the same story, going towards this unknown object out in space. And so they're all different characters. Each of them is like a different sort of story. Like one is clearly like a murder mystery, and one's more of like a scientific hard science story. But they've got the arc of, we are going to the thing in space, and of course all of the stuff around it that makes it the story. But they're all different characters, and it definitely works as a novel because of the central arc.
So one of the things that they asked us to talk about, and we have just a few minutes to do it, but have any of you been in the position of having something in one form that you wanted or needed to change into the other, like a short story that someone asked you to write a novel based on, or a novel where someone said, yeah, I really like this, but it's way too long, can you cut it down?
That is not something I would ever do in a revise and resubmit request. If it came in, we might suggest serializing it, but in order to serialize it, it has to have the plot arc that, it has to have essentially two plot arc lines, one for the whole series and one for each individual segment. So it's difficult to do that. Now, going longer with a short story, I might have somebody submit something that's too short and say, yeah, but we really need that. Yes, we've done that. And I've also talked to a lot of people who thought they were writing single stories into series and series.
Mm-hmm.
That's, yeah, we're reading. More story, mine.
Yes.
No one's ever asked me to do it, but I am expanding a short story I wrote in 2017 into the next novel that I'm writing. It was a story I had an escape pod in late 2017, November, and it's about space whales. And people kept on asking me, what happened next? Come on, you can't just leave it there. And I ended up realizing, no, I really can't. And so it became a novel, but I certainly wouldn't do that for a lot of I certainly wouldn't do that. And I've never actually had an experience where it went the other way, where someone asked me to shorten something up.
Okay. And unfortunately, we're just about out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists. I wish that we could hear the audience applauding, but I know that they're doing it all in their own little houses going to. So, and I also want to particularly thank our tech crew and the Balticon tech crew in general. They have pulled miracles out of absolutely nowhere to put all of this together and have done a fantastic job. Thank you for the audience. We have had a fantastic audience, and we love you guys. Look at the names here. Go buy stuff by all these people. Check in on Discord. Some of us will be there after the panel. Some of us won't because Discord hates me. But other than that, one more thing is please go to the Balticon GoFundMe page to help get some more money for the con, because this has been a huge effort. One person suggested that they were going to give the amount that they would have spent on parking at Balticon. And so that might be a good rule.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Balticon is going to try to get these panel sessions in as many different formats as they can, but that's going to require time and money. So yes,
That's been great, and thanks to all the people who have worked so hard to produce this. I was so disappointed that we weren't going to get to go to Balticon. Mm-hmm. This has been wonderful.
This was a lovely panel. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, well then I guess we are pretty much done. And there we go.
Night, guys.
Bye,
that
everyone.
was my favorite
Bye.
panel of the whole weekend, just so you all know. That actually felt like a conversation. Thank you.
It was
That
wonderful.
was lovely. I really enjoyed it.
It came very close